Late April 1943. North Africa was dying by inches. The war that had begun with blinding speed and arrogance now moved through the Tunisian hills like an exhausted animal, starved, cornered, and bleeding fuel. The olive trees that had stood for centuries bore silent witness to the last convulsions of the Africa Corps. Between their twisted trunks, the soil was still damp with oil and blood. And it was here, among the groves west of Tunis, that Allied scouts found something that defied belief. At first, the reconnaissance patrol thought it was a wreck, another burned-out German hull left behind during the retreat. But as they crept closer through the tall grass, rifles raised, the shape grew larger, impossibly larger. The sunlight caught the slab-sided armor, dull gray with soot and dust, yet untouched by fire. One of the soldiers whispered, "Jesus, it's whole." There, half hidden among olive trees, stood Tiger 712, the monster of legend, intact, silent, and waiting. The first man to touch it was Corporal James Holloway of the British 8th Army. His gloved hand pressed against armor so thick his Enfield rifle might as well have been a child's toy. The steel was still warm from the engine that had died only hours earlier. Olive leaves clung to the turret. The barrel of the 88mm gun jutted between the branches like a frozen serpent. The vehicle's hatches were open. No crew, no blood, no battle damage. Only the heavy smell of machine oil, diesel, and something faintly sweet. German rations left behind in the cupola. The quiet was unreal. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. When the engineers arrived, they moved as if entering a cathedral. Men who had spent months studying grainy photos and field reports now stood face to face with the real thing. 60 tons of German obsession. Captain William Martin of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers circled the tank slowly, taking notes. He had seen wrecks of Panzer IIIs and IVs before. But this was from another world. Interlocking armor plates, precision-cut welds, an 88 that could pierce anything the Allies had ever built. He climbed onto the hull and peered inside. The driver's seat was empty, the instrument panel immaculate. Dials labeled in sharp Gothic script, not a wire frayed, not a gauge broken. On the radio set, the last transmission still scribbled on a pad. Kein Treibstoff mehr, Rückzug sofort. No more fuel. Retreat immediately. The crew had abandoned her alive. Outside, the men debated. How had the crew walked away from something this valuable? Why had they not destroyed it? There were signs of haste. Discarded helmets, a half-empty jerry can, cigarette butts crushed into the mud. But no attempt to blow the tank. No demolition charge. It was as if, in the chaos of the retreat, the order to scuttle her had simply been forgotten. Within hours, word spread through Allied command. The impossible had happened. An operational Tiger had been captured intact. Major Robert N. Crisp, liaison officer to the Americans, arrived the next morning with a convoy of jeeps and a camera crew. The olive grove became a fortress of secrecy. Guards posted. Civilians cleared. Even the location was coded. Olive Site 12. Photographs were taken under strict supervision. The men posed reluctantly beside the tank, their expressions a mix of awe and unease. They knew they were standing next to the deadliest weapon of the Desert War. The first task was to confirm the number. Fahrgestell number 250031. Turret marked 712. Records later traced it to the second company, Schwer Panzerabteilung 501, the first Tiger battalion ever sent outside Europe. It had fought at Sidi Bou Zid, Kasserine Pass, and Beja before being pushed toward Tunis with the remnants of the German line. Now it stood here, the last of its kind still breathing. Captain Martin ordered a full inspection. The men opened the engine hatch and gasped. Inside, The Maybach HL230P45, 12 cylinders of German craftsmanship, lay gleaming. Dust covered the cooling fans, but the belts were still tight, the oil clean. They turned the flywheel by hand. The engine moved freely. Even the batteries held charge. Sergeant Thompson tapped the voltmeter and whistled. "Sir, she's not dead. Just thirsty." They found the fuel tanks bone dry. No punctures, no sabotage. The Germans had simply run out of petrol. That realization struck like a revelation. The Allies had not beaten the Tiger with guns or shells. They had beaten it with mathematics. Gallons, miles, logistics. The most feared tank in the world had surrendered not to a bullet, but to arithmetic. A decision was made immediately. The tank must be preserved, studied, and shipped. The discovery of Tiger 712 could change Allied armor design, penetration data, tactics, everything. Martin sent a coded message to Allied HQ. Tiger tank captured intact near Tunis. Stop. Recommend full technical evaluation. Stop. Urgent recovery requested. Stop. The reply came within hours. Authorize immediate transport. High security priority. Before recovery could begin, Allied engineers recorded every inch. The turret ring measured 1,850 millimeters in diameter, nearly twice that of a Sherman. Armor plates of 100 to 120 millimeters, face-hardened and sloped. Tracks 725 millimeters wide, heavy enough to crush a Jeep. And yet, despite its brutal mass, the controls were delicate. A fingertip could turn the turret traverse wheel. They drained the remaining oil, cataloged the markings. Henschel Castle, 1942. The optics bore the stamp Zeiss Jena. Every part spoke of precision. But behind that precision, the engineers saw something else: fragility. Complexity so extreme that field maintenance would be a nightmare. The interleaved road wheels alone, 24 per side, would clog with Tunisian mud within minutes. The more they studied, the clearer it became. The Tiger was a masterpiece built for a laboratory, not a desert. Still, the find electrified Allied intelligence. Colonel Charles P. Stokes, American liaison for armored research, flew in from Algiers to inspect it personally. He arrived in dust-coated khakis, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. When he stepped into the grove and saw the tank looming over the olive trees, he muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." The Germans built themselves a cathedral on tracks. His men began the logistics assessment. How to move a 56.9-ton vehicle out of an orchard with no road access. They measured bridge weights, tested soil firmness, plotted routes. Every night, they guarded the site with armed patrols. The Germans, only a few miles away, still shelled retreating columns, and there was fear they might try to destroy their lost treasure from the air. But the Luftwaffe never came. They were as fuel-starved as the Tiger itself. Days turned into weeks. The grove filled with engineers, cranes, and trucks. A winch broke under strain. A bridge collapsed. Still, they persisted. Each obstacle only deepened the sense that this was no ordinary capture. It was a turning point in the technological war. By the time the tank reached Tunis port in mid-May, it had become legend. Soldiers saluted it as it passed. Civilians whispered that the Allies had tamed the German beast. At the docks, the Tiger was loaded onto a Liberty ship bound for America. The men watched from the quay as the cranes lifted the massive hull onto the deck, cables groaning, seawater slapping the hull. On its turret, someone had chalked in white letters, Tiger 712, handle with care. Before departure, Captain Martin wrote his report. He ended with a line that would echo through Aberdeen's test files months later. The enemy's greatest weapon was not destroyed in battle. It was abandoned by the men who could no longer feed it. As the ship's engines rumbled and the coastline of North Africa faded behind smoke, no one aboard realized that they were carrying not just a tank, but a revelation. proof that even the strongest armor collapses under the weight of its own hunger. In the stillness of that olive grove, long after the soldiers left, the wind moved through the trees again. The soil bore the deep square prints of Tiger 712's tracks, fossilized reminders of a machine that was meant to conquer continents, but ended up teaching the world a lesson about the limits of power. November 1942. The Mediterranean shimmered with heat, the kind that blurred the horizon and made men question distance. On the docks of Bizerte, Tunisia, cranes groaned over crates marked with a black cross and the stenciled word, Henschel. Soldiers watched in silence as steel giants were unloaded one by one, each resting on broad transport sleds, their shapes hidden beneath tarps. Only when the covers were pulled back did the desert see the face of its new predator. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Ausf E had arrived in North Africa. For the German Afrika Korps, it was both hope and hubris made real. The machine weighed nearly 60 tons, more than twice a Panzer IV. It carried the 8.8-centimeter KWK 36L/56 gun, a weapon descended from the famous anti-aircraft cannon that had humbled every Allied tank it touched. To the soldiers unloading them, the Tigers seemed less like vehicles and more like moving fortresses. Thick, brutal, invincible. Officers from SPZABT, 501, the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, walked among them with the reverence of priests. The first batches were assigned to Oberleutnant Hans-Georg Lueder, a calm, methodical officer whose reports would later become essential to Allied intelligence. His men were trained in Europe, pristine ranges, perfect fuel, steady supply. North Africa would give them none of those luxuries. Yet morale was high. The propaganda machine in Berlin was already calling the Tiger the Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapon that would turn defeat into victory. By December 1942, the Tigers began their first operational sorties east of Tabourba and Pont de Faz. The landscape was a nightmare for them. Deep wadi gullies, loose sand, thin bridges. But they moved like iron animals, slow and deliberate. Their engines, the Maybach HL210P45, thundered through valleys that had never heard such power. Villagers miles away claimed the ground itself trembled. When the Tigers first met the Americans, it was at Sidi Bouzid in February 1943. The U.S. Second Corps had taken defensive positions with M4 Shermans and M3 Lees, confident after limited contact with older German armor. At dawn, fog rolled across the Tunisian plain. The Americans heard engines, deep, rhythmic, alien, before they saw anything. Then shapes emerged from the mist, square turrets, long barrels, tracks wide enough to crush a truck. A radio operator shouted, "Panzer column approaching!" Another voice panicked, "They're huge!" Within minutes, the myth of invincibility was born. Shells from the Shermans bounced off the Tiger's armor like pebbles. Gunners watched in disbelief as their rounds sparked and shattered. The Tiger's reply came with mechanical calm. 88mm shells slicing through the desert air. Each shot found its mark. One Sherman exploded, then another, and another. In less than an hour, an entire platoon was reduced to wreckage. Survivors reported the same haunting detail. "We couldn't hurt them, not even slow them down." That moment spread through Allied ranks faster than any communique. The word Tiger became synonymous with death. American crews gave it nicknames: Ghost Tank, Black Beast, Death Wagon. Some swore they could hear its gears before they saw it. Tank destroyer battalions began to hesitate, even retreat, at unconfirmed sightings. It didn't matter if the report was real. Fear had already done its work. But the truth was more complex. The Tiger's armor was indeed nearly impenetrable from the front, but its sides and rear were vulnerable. Its thick plating came at a price. Weight. The Maybach engine strained under desert heat. Tracks snapped. Gearboxes overheated. Crews were forced to carry wooden planks and steel cables to free themselves when bogged down. The machine's appetite for fuel was insatiable. Over 500 liters for 100 kilometers on good terrain. In North Africa, where every drop of petrol had to cross the Mediterranean under Allied air attack, that hunger was fatal. Still, on the battlefield, perception mattered more than numbers. At Kasserine Pass, February 19th to 22nd, 1943, the Tigers made their psychological mark. American lines broke under artillery and armor thrusts led by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Among the columns were Lueder's Tigers. Their long barrels swept across the valleys, cutting down anything in range. Allied gunners began firing from miles away, desperate to keep them at bay. Radio traffic was chaotic. Fragments of fear and disbelief. Greater than shells ineffective. They're still coming. Repeat, direct hits, no penetration. Rommel watched from a ridge near Feriana, binoculars steady. He admired the Tigers' firepower, but saw the logistical nightmare. They win battles, he told an aide, but they will lose the war for fuel. The British soon learned to adapt. Intelligence officers collected every report, every photograph, and every shell fragment. They studied the pattern of attacks. Tigers often operated in small groups, never far from their supply trucks. Artillery began to target the trucks first. Airstrikes went for convoys, not tanks. And slowly, the desert started turning against the German giants. By March, only a handful of Tigers remained operational in Tunisia. Sand clogged their filters. Salt corroded their optics. Lueder's reports grew more desperate. Our machines cannot move without fresh tracks. Oil temperature exceeds 110 degrees. Supplies delayed by air attacks. Losses not from enemy action, but terrain and fuel. Each entry was a quiet confession. Engineering brilliance undone by reality. Yet back in Berlin, propaganda told another story. Newspapers printed exaggerated victory claims. Photographs showed Tigers advancing through dust clouds, flags waving, crews smiling. The German public believed their new tank was unstoppable. They never read about the transmission failures or the nights spent cannibalizing parts from wrecks. American intelligence, meanwhile, struggled to separate fact from myth. The few wrecked Tigers that had been captured were too damaged to yield real data. Shell impacts revealed terrifying resilience. Even armor-piercing rounds from 75mm guns barely left dents. Engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground pored over fragments, trying to estimate armor thickness and slope angles. They concluded, correctly, that no existing Allied tank gun could reliably penetrate a Tiger's front. And so, across North Africa, the legend deepened. Soldiers began misidentifying every German tank as a Tiger. A Panzer IV with side skirts? Tiger. A Stugee III with long barrel? Tiger. Even knocked-out wrecks were rumored to be fake Tigers designed to scare them. Fear had taken on a life of its own. But those who fought the real thing never forgot the sound. Veteran Sergeant Henry Biddle of the 1st Armored Division later said, "You didn't see the Tiger first. You felt it, like a train rolling under the ground. Your body knew before your eyes did, despite its limited numbers. Fewer than 30 Tigers ever deployed to Africa. The psychological damage was immense. American tank tactics changed overnight. Crews began firing smoke shells and retreating before visual contact. The appearance of a single Tiger could halt an entire advance. By April 1943, the cracks in the legend began to show. Rommel had been recalled to Europe. The Africa Corps, cut off from reinforcements, was disintegrating. British and American air superiority turned the roads into death traps. Fuel convoys never reached their destinations. For the Tigers, every engagement meant gambling with the last liters in their tanks. Mechanics drained fuel from wrecks to keep a few operational. Commanders began ordering withdrawals not because of casualties, but because of empty jerry cans. And yet, Even in retreat, the Tiger remained terrifying. At Mejez el Bab, one Tiger single-handedly held off a column of Shermans for half an hour before stalling. When Allied troops finally approached, they found its engine seized and its crew gone, a steel monument to mechanical pride and human exhaustion. That was the beginning of the end for the Tiger in Africa. By May, the 501st Battalion had fewer than a dozen serviceable tanks. The rest lay crippled along roadsides, awaiting demolition. But one would escape that fate. Tiger 712. Its crew, ordered to destroy it, had no explosives left. They simply walked away. Perhaps they thought the Allies would never find it. Perhaps they couldn't bear to blow up the machine they had served and slept beside for months. Whatever their reasons, that decision would echo through history. When the Allies finally reached Tunis and began mopping up resistance, they discovered the scattered relics of Germany's failed dream: burned trucks, shattered panzers, and among them, the silent giant resting in an olive grove. For the men who saw it, it wasn't just another tank. It was the ghost of every defeat they had suffered since Kasserine, now finally still. The Tiger's legend had begun as terror. In that grove, it began its second life. As knowledge. April 1943. The end had come to North Africa not with one great battle, but with the slow suffocation of an army. From the hills of Beja to the coast of Bizerte, the Africa Corps was crumbling under its own exhaustion. The once proud columns of panzers that had rolled through Libya now sputtered and died in place. Their engines starved, their crews half-starved. Supply lines were broken. Convoys sank beneath Allied bombs before they ever reached shore. And in that slow death, the Tiger, Germany's invincible machine, became its own prisoner. By the first week of April, Schwerer Panzerabteilung 501 reported only 7 operational Tigers. The others were immobilized, cannibalized, or abandoned along the roadside. The battalion's war diary, later recovered by Allied intelligence, captured the hopeless arithmetic of collapse. April 4th. Fuel sufficient for 9 hours movement only. April 7th. Air attack destroyed transport number 112. 88mm ammunition scarce. April 10th. Engine failure on Tiger 713. Crew evacuated under air fire. Every entry ended with the same refrain. Cane benzene, no fuel. The British and Americans were closing from every direction. The 8th Army drove up from the south, while the U.S. Second Corps pressed from the west. The Germans, hemmed in between mountains and sea, fought with the desperation of men who already knew the outcome. For the Tiger crews, survival meant retreat. But retreat required fuel they didn't have. One such machine, Tiger 712, had limped eastward from Mejez el Bab after a final engagement that left its engine coughing black smoke. Its commander, Lieutenant Kurt Keller, recorded in his notebook that morning, "Orders to withdraw to Tunis. We have 120 liters remaining. Impossible distance. We will drive until the last drop, then conceal." The notebook, later found in the driver's compartment, was smeared with oil and dust. The diary of a doomed crew. For days, 712 moved only at night. The men filled its tanks with anything that would burn. Captured petrol, aviation fuel, even a mix of diesel and kerosene. The Maybach HL 230 knocked like a hammer on every stroke. At dawn, they hid under olive trees, camouflaging the turret with branches. Allied aircraft owned the daylight. Any column seen from above was a target. On April 21st, Keller's luck ran out. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died in the middle of a grove west of Tunis. The men climbed out, listening to the silence after the thunder of 12 cylinders finally stopped. They waited for their supply truck. It never came. Radio contact was gone. The set dead from a shrapnel hit days earlier. Through binoculars, they could see smoke columns in the distance, the front collapsing. German units were disintegrating into pockets. Rumors reached them that General von Arnim had ordered a general withdrawal toward the coast, but nobody knew who still commanded whom. What was once an army had become fragments. Inside the tank, the heat grew unbearable. The olive grove offered shade, but the steel trapped every ray. Keller and his men debated their next move. They had demolition charges. 2, both damaged. Without them, they couldn't destroy the tank completely. He wrote again. No fuel, no orders. I will not leave her to the enemy, but I cannot ignite without explosives. We bury the 88mm shells, remove breech block, and pray the next patrol finds nothing. It was the last line in the book. They stripped the Tiger of its documents, folded their maps, and marched toward the hills carrying only sidearms and canteens. Locals would later say 5 German soldiers passed through the nearby village at dusk, gaunt, silent, their uniforms stained with grease. None were seen again. Some historians believe they were captured near Tunis a week later. Others think they joined the sea of prisoners taken after the final surrender on May 13th. The tank they left behind, Tiger 712, stood untouched, engine still warm, like a stranded Leviathan. Across Tunisia, the same tragedy repeated itself. At La Fauconnerie, a Tiger burned when mechanics drained its last fuel to keep another running. At Jebel Bou Aukaz, 2 broke their transmissions on a mountain road and were blown up with grenades. Others simply ran dry and were set alight. But 712 escaped destruction by chance, or fatigue. The men were too exhausted to care, too defeated to carry out one more order. The mightiest tank on Earth was abandoned, not by cowardice, but by entropy. Meanwhile, Allied bombers darkened the sky. The ports of Tunis and Bizerte were under constant attack. German trucks loaded with ammunition exploded in chains of fire visible for miles. The few remaining Tigers were ordered to form a rear guard, but their role was symbolic. A gesture of defiance in a war already lost. They fired their last shells in defense of roads the enemy no longer needed to take. When Allied reconnaissance spotted the wrecks, they marked them with white smoke for engineers to study. But when they found 712, it was different. Its turret was intact. The 88mm breech block removed, yes, but otherwise perfect. No demolition scars, no shell holes. The tank looked asleep. The engineers realized immediately what they had. A gift the enemy had been too exhausted to destroy. Back in Germany, the reports from Tunisia painted a grim picture. The Afrika Korps had lost over 230,000 men, killed, captured, or missing. The proud 501st Battalion ceased to exist. The Tiger's debut theater had become its graveyard. And yet, in that ruin lay its resurrection. For the Allies, 712 wasn't just a trophy. It was an open book. Every bolt, every bearing, every weld line could be studied, measured, replicated, countered. The Allies had not merely won a battle. They had gained insight into the enemy's soul. In the days after the surrender, Allied teams cataloged the remains of the German heavy units. Photographers documented burned tanks, dismantled guns, and rusting fuel drums marked Nur für Wehrmacht. The contrast was stark. The precision of German engineering scattered among the ruins of a collapsing empire. Officers spoke in low voices about the lessons learned. Superior design could not survive inferior supply. For the men who found 712, the moment carried something heavier than victory. Corporal Holloway later said in a post-war interview, "We expected a fight. What we found was silence. You don't forget that kind of silence. 60 tons of metal and not a sound in it." The olive grove seemed frozen in time, leaves whispering above the hulk, the smell of oil lingering in the air like incense. By May 7th, The last Axis stronghold in Tunisia fell. 5 days later, the remaining German and Italian forces surrendered unconditionally. The Afrika Korps, once Rommel's instrument of lightning war, was gone. In its wake, thousands of destroyed vehicles littered the roads, but only one machine would cross an ocean to tell its story. The discovery of Tiger 712 closed the chapter of the Desert War and opened another. One written not in the sand of Tunisia, but in the laboratories of America. The tank that had once ruled by fear would soon be dissected by those who had feared it most. Its defeat was not in flames or explosions, but in stillness, a monument to the fact that in modern war, logistics were stronger than legend. The olive grove kept its secret for only a few days. Then came the convoys, the cranes, the cameras. The world's most powerful tank would rise again, lifted by cables, crated, and shipped across an ocean. And as it left the Tunisian coast, the wind moved through the empty branches where it had stood, whispering the same truth that every soldier would learn before the war was over. Steel wins battles. Fuel wins wars. May 1943. The war in North Africa was over, but for the engineers who had captured Tiger 712, the work had only begun. The machine sat at the edge of the olive grove like a stranded sea creature, its armor dull beneath the North African sun, its tracks half buried in dust. Now it had to move. 60 tons of German steel across ruined roads, broken bridges, and enemy-infested skies, all the way to the coast. Recovery began at dawn. British and American mechanical engineers surrounded the tank with cranes, winches, and sheer determination. Every movement had to be calculated. The soil's bearing strength, the limits of cables, the slope of each road segment. Major Robert Stokes stood with his map, tracing a line from the grove to the port of Tunis. It was barely 60 miles, yet might as well have been 600. The bridges ahead were designed for trucks, not monsters. They began by stripping weight. Spare track links, toolboxes, and even the 88mm breech block were removed and crated separately. The turret was locked in place, the gun tied forward with chains to prevent movement. Then came the real challenge: towing. The Americans brought in 2 M19 tank transporters, each with a 60-ton rated winch, reinforced with additional cables. The Germans had used specialized half-tracks to recover their Tigers, but those had long since been destroyed. Allied crews improvised, coupling the transports in tandem to distribute strain. The cables groaned, the ground trembled, and inch by inch, the Tiger began to move. Dust rose around its tracks like breath returning to a body long thought dead. Local villagers gathered at a distance, silent, watching the impossible. To them, it was not just a tank. It was a captured myth, a symbol that the invincible could fall. By the second day, the convoy reached the first obstacle, a stone bridge over the Majerta River, barely wide enough for a truck with a 30-ton limit. The engineers walked its length, measured, argued, calculated. Then Stokes made the call. They would build a temporary bypass, a makeshift causeway of steel planking and gravel. For 48 hours, the men worked without sleep. When at last the Tiger rolled across, its tracks clanging on the metal plates, even the officers clapped. It was the heaviest vehicle ever to cross that span, and it held. Every mile toward Tunis was a victory against physics. The convoy moved only at night to avoid air raids, headlights covered in blue filters. The roads were littered with wrecks, burned trucks, twisted half-tracks, rusted fuel drums. At dawn, they hid the Tiger under camouflage nets. German aircraft still prowled the skies, desperate for targets. One morning, a single Bf-109 swooped low, strafing the column. The men dove for cover as bullets sparked off the tank's hull. The Tiger, indifferent, bore the scars like raindrops. By May 18th, the convoy reached Tunis. The city, newly liberated, was a ruin of smoke and rubble. Allied engineers cleared the harbor, and among the Liberty ships waiting offshore was one designated for a very special cargo. SS Samuel P. Bush, a 7,200-ton cargo vessel built in Baltimore just months earlier. Its manifest read simply, "Captured German tank. Priority shipment." Loading Tiger 712 onto the ship was an operation that drew half the port to watch. Dock cranes groaned under the strain. The tank was too wide for standard cargo holds, so the crew reinforced the deck with steel beams and placed it topside, chained directly to the hull. The scene was surreal. A German war machine lashed to an American ship, the swastika barely visible beneath layers of dust and chalk markings. Tiger 712, handle with care. Before departure, British intelligence teams completed a final inspection. They photographed every inch, from the interleaved road wheels to the turret welds. The engineers documented the serial numbers, noting the Henschel plate, Fahrgestell number 250031, confirming it as an early production Tiger built in Kassel. Inside the crew compartment, they found fragments of ration tins, cigarette stubs, and a field map still pinned under the driver's clipboard. The route from Beja to Tunis drawn in pencil, ending abruptly with the word, "Stop." As the Liberty ship prepared to depart, Major Stokes watched from the pier. "We'll learn more from that machine than they ever did," he said quietly. He wasn't wrong. The SS Samuel P. Bush departed Tunis under armed escort. Submarines still prowled the Mediterranean, and the Allies weren't about to lose their prize to one. A British destroyer, HMS Pakenham, shadowed the convoy for the first 2 days before turning back. The ship then passed through the Straits of Gibraltar and out into the Atlantic. From there, it was a long gray voyage through storm and fear. The crew treated their cargo like a living thing. Sailors joked that the tank was growling when the ship creaked. Others avoided walking near it at night. The sight of its gun pointing silently over the railing unnerved even hardened men. The Atlantic crossing was rough. Waves slammed the deck, salt spray corroded every exposed surface, but the Tiger endured, unmoving, chained to the sea like a captive beast. A radio message from the U.S. Army Ordnance Department awaited them at port. Upon arrival, transport immediately to Aberdeen Proving Ground. Security clearance, top secret. After 2 weeks at sea, on July 18, 1943, the ship sighted the American coast. The Statue of Liberty rose through morning mist as the cargo vessel entered New York Harbor. Civilians on the dock stared as cranes lifted the German tank off the ship's deck. Some gasped, others took photographs. Newspapers caught wind of the story. "Nazi supertank captured intact," screamed one headline. The government quickly suppressed further photos. Officially, Tiger 712 became Ordnance Technical Intelligence Item Number 2704. From New York, it was loaded onto a rail flat car designed for heavy artillery pieces. The journey to Maryland took 2 days. Farmers along the tracks paused their work to watch the monster roll by. A weapon of Europe gliding past American cornfields. Children waved. The soldiers didn't wave back. They were under strict orders. No discussion, no press, no unauthorized viewing. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Tiger was greeted not by soldiers, but by scientists. Colonel George B. Jarrett, the head of the Ordnance Museum and chief of the Army's Technical Intelligence Unit, was there in person. He had been waiting months for this moment. The Tiger was unloaded onto a concrete pad near the test range, surrounded by cranes and floodlights. Jarrett walked around it slowly, his boots echoing against the hull. "Gentlemen," he said to his team, "this is the heart of the enemy's pride. Let's open it carefully." The tone shifted instantly. The battlefield was gone. The laboratory had taken over. The dust of Africa gave way to the sterilized smell of oil and solvent. Engineers in coveralls crawled over the machine, measuring, tapping, photographing. They recorded everything: hull thickness, gun elevation, suspension travel, turret traverse rate. It was part autopsy, part reverence. American armor specialists were astonished by what they saw. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Every weld seamless, every bolt perfectly machined. The interleaved road wheel system, though complex, offered uncanny stability. The torsion bar suspension gave the Tiger a ride smoother than any Allied tank. The Maybach HL-230 engine, once cleaned of sand and grime, ran smoothly during a bench test. "It's like taking apart a grand piano built for war," one mechanic remarked. But Jarrett saw more than beauty. He saw flaws. Fuel consumption figures shocked everyone. At optimal conditions, the Tiger consumed 1.2 gallons per mile on road and up to 5 gallons per mile off-road. Its gearbox required near-constant maintenance. Its spare parts were specialized, meaning any field repair demanded a mobile workshop. Jarrett noted grimly, "It's a masterpiece that eats itself alive." By August, the Tiger had been fully disassembled. The 88mm gun was fired on range tests, confirming penetration of 102mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Devastating, but not invincible. U.S. gunners compared it against their 75mm and new 76mm rounds, learning how to defeat it. The engineers concluded that air superiority, maneuverability, and logistics, not brute armor, would decide the next phase of the war. In September 1943, Tiger 712 was reassembled and placed on public display for a brief press demonstration. Under guard, without details. Reporters were told it was a captured German tank. They never knew it was the Tiger that had terrified North Africa. Soon after, it was moved to Fort Knox and later to Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, where generations of officers would study it. The journey of Tiger 712, from Olive Grove to Atlantic, from fear to knowledge, symbolized more than a capture. It marked the moment the Allies began to see through the myth of German invincibility. The tank that once ruled the battlefield was now a teacher, and somewhere deep inside its welded heart, beneath layers of oil and dust, the last echo of its Maybach engine seemed to whisper across time. A reminder that even the strongest machines can be undone by the smallest shortages. A few gallons of fuel, a few lost hours, a few broken lines on a map. July 1943. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The summer air hung heavy with humidity and the scent of machine oil. Beneath the overcast sky, Tiger 712 stood at the center of a fenced compound, its dull gray armor streaked with salt from the Atlantic crossing. Soldiers guarded every gate. Engineers, officers, and ordnance experts moved around it with a mixture of awe and clinical focus. The world's most feared tank had crossed an ocean to be dissected. Colonel George B. Jarrett, head of the Ordnance Technical Intelligence Unit, led the evaluation. He had made a career out of understanding the enemy's machines, from Italian artillery to Japanese aircraft guns. But the Tiger was different. This was the first time the Allies possessed an intact example of Germany's secret weapon, not a burned-out wreck or twisted hull. "Gentlemen," Jarrett said during the briefing, "what you're looking at changed the balance of power in Africa. Our job is to make sure it never does again." The first step was a full mechanical survey. Teams of American and British engineers measured every component: armor thickness, turret traverse rate, gear ratios, suspension travel, and internal layout. They found the armor to be formidable. 100 millimeters at the front glasses, 82 millimeters at the sides, 62 millimeters at the rear, all hardened and machined to perfection. Every weld line was flawless. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. Henschel quality. The Maybach HL 230P45 engine, a 12-cylinder gasoline power plant producing 700 horsepower, was removed, cleaned, and bench tested. When the ignition finally caught, the deep rhythmic roar filled the hangar. Jarrett watched the tachometer needle rise. "She's alive again," one mechanic muttered. But the excitement faded as data came in. At full throttle, fuel consumption bordered on lunacy. 1.2 gallons per mile on road, 4 to 6 gallons per mile cross-country. The Tiger's operational range, barely 100 kilometers on a full tank, was a logistical nightmare. It's a tactical masterpiece, Jarrett noted, and a strategic liability. The transmission, a Maybach Olvar 4012-16, was another revelation. It provided 8 forward gears, 2 reverse, and remarkably smooth torque control, but only when handled by expert crews. Even minor mistakes could destroy the gearbox. Test driver Sergeant R.E. King recorded that shifting requires both arms and prayer. Within a week, the Aberdeen team had learned what German maintenance crews already knew. The Tiger demanded perfection and punished anything less. The interleaved road wheel system drew particular fascination. 24 large steel wheels per side overlapped in a complex pattern, designed to distribute weight and reduce ground pressure. On European roads, it worked beautifully. In Tunisian mud or Russian snow, it froze solid. Engineers spent hours removing packed clay from the wheel gaps, muttering that the design belonged to a parade, not a battlefield. The man who built this never had to clean it, one technician joked. Then came the gun. The 8.8 centimeter KWK 36L/56, the same weapon that had terrified Allied crews in Africa, was mounted on a firing range. Using captured German ammunition, testers recorded muzzle velocities of 773 meters per second with PZGR 39 APCBC rounds. At 1,000 yards, the shell penetrated 102 millimeters of homogeneous armor, enough to kill any Allied tank in existence. They fired dozens of rounds, measuring dispersion, accuracy, and recoil. The gun's precision was extraordinary. Its optics, made by Zeiss Jena, offered crystal clarity. Allied tankers would later envy that sight picture until war's end. But each test brought the same conclusion: brilliance weighed down by excess. The Tiger's armor, firepower, and engineering excellence were offset by fragility and fuel addiction. American engineers compared the data to the M4 Sherman. The Sherman was faster, lighter, easier to build and repair, and could be shipped across oceans by the hundreds. "You can have one Tiger," Jarrett said, "or 20 Shermans that never stop running." Brigadier General Gladian M. Barnes, Chief of Ordnance for U.S. Army Ground Forces, visited Aberdeen during the second week of testing. Standing beside the open engine compartment, he listened as Jarrett summarized the findings. "This tank is what happens when engineers design for fear, not for war," Jarrett said. Barnes nodded. "And now we know what they fear most: running out of gas." The technical data flowed into reports bound for Washington. Charts compared German metallurgy, armor hardness, and design philosophy with Allied production methods. The numbers were stunning. The Tiger's armor contained more nickel and molybdenum than any Allied tank could afford. Germany's dwindling resources made each vehicle a luxury item. The Allied conclusion was simple: quantity beats perfection when the enemy can't keep its machines moving. To prove it, Aberdeen staged a demonstration. They lined up 3 tanks on the test range: a Tiger I, a captured Panther D, and an American M4A3 Sherman. Officers, engineers, and even representatives from General Motors and Ford watched from bleachers. When the engine started, the Tiger's deep growl dwarfed the others. But when the order came to move, the Sherman sprinted away while the Tiger lurched forward like a ship leaving port. After 2 miles, the Sherman returned. The Tiger hadn't even reached the halfway mark. "That," Jarrett said, "is the sound of logistics winning a war." In August, ballistic tests began. Using 76mm and 90mm American guns, engineers fired at the Tiger's armor from various ranges. The front plates shrugged off everything up to point-blank 76mm fire. Only the new 90mm M3 gun, later used on the M36 Jackson, could penetrate reliably at 1,200 yards. Still, the tests gave Allied designers confidence that tactics, not miracles, could counter it. By coordinating artillery, air power, and maneuver, they could flank and overwhelm any Tiger force. The myth was beginning to crack. As reports circulated through the War Department, American tank development shifted. The focus turned to mobility, reliability, and fuel range. The M4A3E8 Easy 8, the M26 Pershing, and even the concept of future main battle tanks owed something to what Aberdeen learned from Tiger 712. The Tiger taught them that no tank could exist outside its supply chain. A weapon that consumed 5 gallons per mile could never win a global war. Meanwhile, journalists were kept away, but rumors spread. Soldiers passing through Aberdeen glimpsed the massive silhouette behind fences and whispered, "That's the German super tank they found in Africa." Some nights, guards swore they heard metallic clicks from inside, as if the beast were dreaming. The legend persisted even as the data dismantled it. By autumn, Tiger 712 had been reduced to components again. The gun went to ballistic research, the engine to Fort Knox for powertrain studies. The hull remained at Aberdeen. Colonel Jarrett posed for one photograph beside it, his hand resting on the armor. The caption, later published in the Ordnance Journal, read, "Captured Tiger Tank, North Africa. Study in Strength and Weakness." His final report to Washington ended with a single, unambiguous line: "Tactical brilliance cannot compensate for strategic starvation." That phrase became a quiet creed among Allied engineers. From Normandy to the Ardennes, they would remember the lesson. Don't fight the Tiger head-on. Starve it, cut its fuel, isolate it, force it to sit in a field until mathematics kills it. And when those future battles came, the proof appeared on French roads: abandoned Tigers, engines dry, guns silent, crews gone. Everyone was a monument to the lesson learned at Aberdeen. Wars are not won by machines that can kill everything. They're won by machines that can keep moving. Tiger 712's journey from Tunisia to Maryland had transformed it from symbol of terror to instrument of knowledge. What the German engineers built to dominate had instead taught their enemies how to endure. The tank that once ruled by fire now surrendered to arithmetic. Autumn 1944. The rain fell softly over Normandy's empty roads, pooling in the tracks of retreating armor. Abandoned Tigers lined the hedgerows, hulking silhouettes against a gray horizon. Their long 88mm barrels pointed at nothing. Engines silent, crews gone. Some burned, others simply out of fuel. What began as the terror of Tunisia had ended in quiet surrender. The same logistical curse that doomed the Africa Corps now haunted Europe. The lesson learned at Aberdeen had come full circle. Allied soldiers who once whispered the word Tiger with fear now walked past the wrecks with familiarity. They knew its secret: the hunger that could not be fed. Convoys of Shermans rolled past in endless columns, fueled, supplied, repaired, unstoppable by sheer abundance. For every Tiger, there were 20 Shermans, 10 tank destroyers, and an air squadron overhead. Strategy had absorbed the data from Tiger 712 and turned it into doctrine. Never fight the Tiger head-on, starve it instead. At Aberdeen, the captured tank remained where the war's engineers had left it. No longer a weapon, but a classroom. Students of the Ordnance Corps gathered around its cut-open hull, tracing the welds, studying the torsion bars, examining the precision that once awed them. The armor was sliced in cross-section so trainees could see how German metallurgy distributed hardness across layers. The 88mm gun sat on display beside American 90mm prototypes, the lineage of fear transformed into innovation. Colonel Jarrett visited often. He walked between exhibits, the Tiger, the Panther, the Sherman, and spoke quietly to the young officers. "The Germans built perfection," he would say, "and perfection broke them. Remember that when you design your next machine. It's not the weapon that wins. It's the man and the system that keeps it running." When the war in Europe ended in 1945, reports from Army Ordnance cited Tiger 712 repeatedly. Its test results became reference tables for every major Allied armor study. The Aberdeen Tiger Report, a 180-page document stamped confidential. It circulated among factories and research divisions across America, influencing the design of post-war tanks. The M26 Pershing, the M46 Patton, even early concepts that would evolve into the M60. Each inherited lessons not of imitation, but of avoidance. Simplicity over luxury, logistics over spectacle. The British, too, absorbed its influence. The Centurion, conceived in 1944 and refined through 1945, reflected the Tiger's paradox. It sought to combine protection and firepower without sacrificing mobility. When British engineers examined the Aberdeen data, they annotated it in pencil. Build for endurance, not awe. Across the Atlantic, the captured Tiger became a quiet celebrity. Journalists occasionally caught glimpses of it at military expos, still wearing its African dust beneath layers of paint. Civilians gawked at the monstrous tracks, unable to imagine how something so large could be beaten not by bombs, but by fuel shortages. In 1950, when the Ordnance Museum moved to Fort Knox, the Tiger went with it. Technicians cut a section from the side armor for classroom use. Inside, you could see the lamination of steel, a scar turned into a lesson. The irony was poetic. The same tank that once symbolized invincibility now existed only to teach the value of limitation. Generations of cadets learned not to fear it, but to understand it. Every time they climbed into its empty turret, they saw the ghost of engineering pride without practicality. Colonel Jarrett retired in 1952. In his final lecture at Fort Moore, he told a story that wasn't in any report. He recalled standing beside Tiger 712 in Tunisia the day it was found. It was still warm, he said. The engine had gone silent maybe an hour before. And I remember thinking, this machine didn't lose to courage or to gunfire. It lost to arithmetic. The numbers caught up to it. He paused, smiled faintly, and added, "War always belongs to the side that can add." Decades later, long after Jarrett's death, museum visitors still stopped before the Tiger's immense frame. Children pressed their hands against the cold steel, reading the placard that summarized its journey. Captured intact near Tunis, 1943. Tested at Aberdeen. Symbol of engineering excellence and its limits. The story of Tiger 712 became more than military history. It became parable. Industrial nations studied its lessons far beyond the battlefield. Economists cited it as an example of unsustainable complexity. Engineers used it to warn against over-design. Even strategists in the Cold War, staring at the balance between quality and quantity, invoked its name. The Tiger had outlived its creators, teaching those who had once feared it how to think. And yet, for all the lectures and data, those who had stood beside it in the olive grove never forgot the silence. They remembered the smell of hot oil, the empty crew seats, the faint wind through the trees. That moment, the instant when myth turned to machinery, was the true legacy. Tiger 712 had revealed the human truth behind the numbers. That pride without endurance is surrender disguised as strength. When the last Allied veterans returned to Tunisia decades later, they found the grove still standing. The olive trees had grown tall again, roots entwined with rusted fragments of track and shrapnel. Beneath the soil, faint outlines of steel remained, like fossils of an extinct species. The villagers said that after rain, the earth still smelled faintly of fuel. Tiger 712 never roared again. But its voice endured, in textbooks, in factories, in the hum of every modern engine that values efficiency over arrogance. It had been a monster, then a miracle, then a message. The final line of Colonel Jarrett's report became its epitaph. Tactical brilliance without logistical wisdom is not power, it is postponement. And so the Tiger's story ended not in flames, but in understanding. The tank that once ruled by terror became a monument to restraint. It did not lose to guns or bombs or courage. It lost to the quiet, unstoppable arithmetic of war. It lost to fuel,